where we're going today. We're talking about the fear of change. And this is where we're headed today. We're going to talk about Bananagate. We're going to talk about George Washington and whether or not he was divine, apotheosis and debasement, Jacob and Esau, Bethsaida, and the question. So it was 1980. Our family was back from a 2-week trip to the East Coast. We drove from the Kansas City area all the way out to Connecticut to see my sister, who had her first job there. Made our way back. We were tired and hungry when we pulled into our residence that night. We got in, we got all the stuff inside, everything packed away that was in our vehicle. And being 10 years old, I was hungry. At 10 years old, I was always hungry, but I was really hungry now. And it was probably 9 o'clock at night, and I went on a fool's errand. I went into the kitchen thinking, I wonder if there's anything to eat. But we'd been gone for 2 weeks, and there would be anything at all worth eating. But then somehow, by a miracle of God, on the counter was a banana. Somehow this got lost along the way. What a welcome sight. So at 10 years old, I indulged. So good. And I finished the banana. And I was delighted. I felt energized, ready to go to bed. And my dad shows up in the same kitchen that I just finished this banana in. And he sees me taking the last bite of the banana. And he looks at me, and with a harsh tone, he says, "Do you really think you need that?" I was crushed. I've told this story before. I'm going to unpack it in some different ways today. I was crushed. And the reason I was crushed is because I think children do this anyway, but I'm pretty sure boys do this kind of inherently. It's an innate thing. To me, my dad was a god. A god. And there was nobody I looked up to more than my father. And if you're a kid that age, I think that's fairly normal. Where even if they're offbeat in some way, you don't know that yet. So you look at them as a god, and you treat them like a god. And at that moment at night, God had spoken. And it crushed me. It crushed me. This is a thing we do. You know, in the United States, in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., up in the rotunda, inside, the big dome, there is a painting. And it's called The Apotheosis of George Washington, or actually, The Apotheosis of Washington. Apotheosis is one of those words you probably don't use a whole lot, but what it simply means is when we transform a person from a mere human to godlike status or divinity. And the painting depicts just that. The first president of the United States is at the very top of the rotunda, surrounded by angels, as if to communicate for all who would ever look from that point forward that our first president was indeed becoming a god. We do that with people. We raise them up. We lift them really high. And I wonder who that has been for you. Maybe it was your dad. I'm not sure. I wouldn't be surprised if it was your dad or your mom or some close relative or something like that. That's normal. Well, there's an opposite of that, because some of us grew up in conditions that there was absolutely no way apotheosis could happen, because the context was so deplorable that we went the opposite way. So if apotheosis is to take you really high, debasement would have to be the antithesis of that. Not the basement. We're not trying to be New Jersey here, but debasement, where you take the humanity, the divinity right out of a person. You cannot think anything good about that person. What's interesting, that this tension that we have between apotheosis with our heroes and debasement with our villains, by the way, we do that politically, for sure. That's part of our binary problem in America, is we have somehow come into this idea that if you are for a candidate, you are for everything that candidate does, and you don't question them. And if you do, then maybe you're not an allegiant follower of whoever that is, on either side. What we fail to realize is that the biblical story actually gives us the tension in the first couple of chapters. This tension between apotheosis and debasement. It's in the creation story, the second creation story in Genesis chapter 2, where God creates Adam out of dirt. We've talked about this before. You have this dirt clod that God has created in the form of a man, a human being, but that human being is not yet alive until God breathes life into this dirt clod's nostrils. Before that, just a clod. But now, with the breath of God, a divine dirt clod. You, my friends, you and I are divine dirt clods. Tell that to your neighbor. Tell that to your friends. Write it in a birthday card. Congratulations, you divine dirt clod. Because it's true, and the faster we come to grips with this reality, the more whole we're actually going to be. Because we're not completely debased. There's not one human being on earth that is completely debased and without the divine spark within them. And yeah, we are all ultra clear that there is not one human being on the planet that is so above the rest of us that they are perfect in every way. We are all divine dirt clods, divinely infused dirt. You and me both. I wonder how you're doing with that tension, just admitting it that it's true. It kind of immediately hits at that perfectionism thing that some of us struggle with and says, you know what, you could probably let that go because you're never going to get there. Well, back to Bananagate, as it became known the world over. 10 years later, I started to come to grips with the humanity of my father. This is a healthy thing to do with our parents and the people that we have esteemed as our heroes. And I was at the right age to do it. I was away at college. That's the place, it's sort of the fertile ground for us to process stuff and differentiate ourselves from our family of origin, decide who we are and who we're not and all that. And for whatever reason, I came to full appreciation of my father's humanity. It wasn't a balanced assessment. It wasn't in his favor. You kind of have to expect that, don't you? That if you've done the apotheosis treatment for so long, then when you finally recognize the dirt clod part of this tension, you're probably going to swing the pendulum a little too far, and I did. I'll never forget. I will never forget how hard I wept. It was the first time I can remember weeping that hard in my life. As I came to the full reality that my father was deeply human, and that at times, because of his humanity, of his dirt clodness, there were moments in my life, and this was one of them, where I wasn't even sure that I was loved by my father. That's hard. And when you're 19, 20 years old, that is a tough realization. Never felt so alone, never felt so despairing. But it was important that I went through that. Because as Richard Rohr notes from a few weeks ago in his devotional thing you get, which is a quote on the next slide, I think, as any good therapist will tell you, you cannot heal what you do not acknowledge. What you do not consciously acknowledge will remain in control from within, festering and destroying you and those around you. In the Gospel of Thomas, which isn't in the canon but still has some things to say, in the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus teaches, if you bring forth that which is within you, it will save you. If you do not bring it forth, it will destroy you. I've said this in a number of ways over the years, and I speak it from experience, that if you don't deal with the junk in your life, if you don't deal with the pain in your life, sit tight. If you want to be in denial that there's anything going on under the hood, sit tight. If you don't deal with it, it will always deal with you. Always. It may not come in ways that you even recognize it. I was having a conversation a week or so ago with a friend whose sister is married to a guy that his MO is tells his wife, and they had the wife had a difficult upbringing and a really horrific family system. And so, the husband would tell his wife, that stuff's in the past. Just stop living in the past and live right now. You don't have to dwell on any of that stuff. Just move forward. That's what I do, and it doesn't affect me a bit. The thing is, this is the only guy on the planet who thinks it hasn't affected him in a bit. Because anybody who knows him for 10 minutes knows he has a hair trigger when it comes to anger. He's had employment issues. He's had relationship struggles. All because of this anger, which he doesn't know where it's coming from, because there's no need to look. It's just who he is. No, this is the pain dealing with him. And I'm wondering, maybe it would be a helpful thing for us to think through our lives and wonder, where are the trouble spots? What are the patterns in our lives? And could it be that the trouble spots are actually pointing us in the direction of what Rohr is saying? That maybe there is something beneath the surface that needs to be addressed and healed. Because until that is addressed, whatever Band-Aid we slap on it, it's really not going to do much good. It's just going to be a matter of time before it comes back roaring in our life. Not just affecting us, but affecting those that we love the most. This reminds me of a story. We're going to take a look at two things. And by the way, that... no! Gosh. Well, maybe that's fitting, right? Maybe that's exactly how it felt. Like I didn't want that piece of banana anyway. That's kind of how pain is in our lives. There's a story in the Bible about a guy named Jacob and a guy named Esau. These guys were born at the same time. They were twins. The Bible says that even when they were in utero, they fought, which led to a theological idea that maybe it is possible to sin before you're even born. And they use that as a reference for it because they wrestled inside of the womb, and it was a fight. Who was going to get out of the womb first? Well, these two kids grew up with daddy issues. And the reason they grew up with daddy issues is because their daddy had daddy issues. Their daddy's name was Isaac. You may remember Isaac's daddy, Abraham. We don't know if Abraham had daddy issues. Let's just assume so. But there was a point in Abraham's time. This is the guy who founded Judaism, by the way. We look back to him as the father of the whole thing. And there was this moment, you may have remembered this story, where Abraham, because the context he lived in, which was okay with such things, he sensed God telling him, I want you to take your son Isaac up to a mountain and sacrifice him in honor of me. That deeply troubles us. Well, let Abraham be in his time and his culture, okay? This was not uncommon back then. In fact, it was common. And probably for Abraham, he was like, oh, that stinks. I didn't think this was how it was going to go, but all right, I guess that's what we do. So he gets up there and has Isaac carry his own wood, right, up the mountain. Isaac's wondering, what are we sacrificing? We forgot to bring a sacrifice. And Abraham just kind of keeps it at bay a little bit. And as the knife in his hand is coming down to kill his son, in the 11th hour, finally, here's a voice of God saying, stop! And so he does. Abraham spares Isaac. God intervenes to make a point. We're not doing this anymore. No more human sacrifice. It's done. So Abraham wipes his brow. Isaac wipes his brow. And as soon as Isaac gets back to home, he pulls out the yellow pages to find a good therapist. But there weren't any therapists. And so this experience levels Isaac. And he did not do well. And his judgment was cloudy in raising his two sons, Jacob and Esau. And one of the biggest blunders he made is he made it very clear who his favorite kid was. It was not Jacob. It was Esau. Esau was a rugged outdoorsman. This is the guy, you give him anything to hunt with, he'll come back with some good game. And he also knew how to cook it up. There's part of the story where Isaac is wanting to confer his blessing on Esau. He's going to be the head of the household. And he says to Esau, hey, go kill me something good and prepare. You know how I like that tasty food. And he says the phrase tasty food like 6 times, in the same passage. So this guy, he's got a secret recipe or something, right? And so that's Esau, man's man, rugged, all that. And he goes out and he's going to kill some game to bring back to dad. Well, his twin brother Jacob gets wind of what's going on, and so does Jacob and Esau's mother. And mom understands that if Esau is in charge of the estate, that's not going to do well by the estate. See, Esau was a great outdoorsman, but Jacob was a CPA. Jacob knew how to work the numbers, he knew the law, he knew how to make the business work. And so mom knew, man, we've got to get this thing remedied. And so they pulled a trick on Isaac. Isaac mistakenly gave the blessing, basically signed his trust over to Jacob. He became the one who was going to be in charge of the whole household. Esau gets back with his game, prepares the tasty food, brings it into dad, says, here it is, venison just like you like it. And Isaac's like, what are you talking about? He says, well, you told me to go get some food, so now I'm here. I'm looking forward to that blessing. And Isaac says, I'm sorry, son, but I already gave it away. The ink's still wet, but it's a done deal. You might guess at this point that Esau, realizing that this wasn't going to be challenged in court, was just a little bit upset that he just lost a fortune to his stupid, nerdy brother, Jacob. And if you are a rugged outdoorsman and you're good with weaponry, if you're Esau, what do you think you just might do? Kill the brother. Well, Jacob knew this was going to happen, so he took off. He went to a distant relative's house, an uncle named Laban, because he knew that there was no way he was going to live at home. So we have major changes happening here, don't we? We have a major change between Esau and Jacob. Jacob really stretching, taking a massive risk just to get that estate, which is kind of underhanded, a little bit sneaky. But you got to imagine what caused him to do that action, and then what caused Jacob to flee his home and go to a distant land where he'd have to start all over. Well, it's easy. He stays and he dies. A slow death if Esau's in charge of the estate. A very quick death once he decides that he's going to run the estate. And that's the way a lot of physical changes that we do in life go, isn't it? We don't change unless we have to, because we don't particularly like change. Well, Jacob finds his way to Uncle Laban's house. He takes him on his work, falls in love with one of his daughters. He's got two daughters. According to Isaac, or according to Jacob and his vision of things, one of them is beautiful and he falls in love with her immediately. The other one he doesn't care for as much. Her name is Leah. And so he strikes a deal with the father. He says, I'll work for you for 7 years if you'll let me marry your daughter. And the guy's like, oh, that's a pretty good deal. All right, let's go with that. So he works for 7 years, does a great job. He's the CPA now on site, and things are going very well for Laban's household and business. Finally, time for the wedding day. They tie the knot. They have their honeymoon night. Jacob wakes up, looks at his wife, only to discover, if you've seen the movie, the wrong sister is in bed with him. And given how they understood women as property back then, he now owned her. He was not happy. He goes back to Laban and says, I don't understand why I woke up next to Leah. What is going on? He's like, she was my older daughter. I kind of had to, didn't I? And Jacob is furious, but he still loves the sister Rachel. And so he says, all right, I'm really ticked off, but here's what I'll do. If you let me marry her today, I'll work for you another 7 years. And he says yes. Marries Rachel. Now he's got 2 wives. He's committed for 7 years in the contract. During that time, all kinds of back and forth happens. The CPA continues to get worked out in him, and his success only skyrockets. Laban is concerned, Uncle Laban's concerned that he's going to get a little too wealthy, and so he tries to do his own little trickery to make it so it's harder for Jacob to survive. But Jacob's on it. He understands the ins and outs. He's well studied. He's a nerd. Nerds rule the world, and he ruled that world. Just like that guy in that jet. I'm sure he's a nerd. And so as we continue the story, we have Jacob, and he's just doing great. But now he's 2 decades into the story, with 2 wives, now a bunch of kids. And he's had enough. He knows that the future for him is not, it's only going to be a repeat of the same. And so he comes to a fork in the road. And I wonder if you've come to this fork in the road at times in your life, where you realize if you stay where you are in your life, it's going to be painful. And you realize to make a change in a new direction is also going to be painful. But as you assess things, you realize that the pain to stay where you are and not change a thing is really worse than the potential pain of the unknown future. And so you make the change. That's how it works, isn't it? We stay in the rut we're in until we can't take it anymore. And then we can't do anything but get out of Dodge and do the thing that we know we should have done a long time ago. Deeply painful stuff. You been there? These are just physical changes. I don't know how this is hitting you. This may be in a relationship thing that you're in. This may be in a job you feel stuck in. This may be in relocating your life and where that's going to be. I don't know. But I am absolutely certain that if you haven't experienced it yet, which I doubt, you will experience it in the future. Big changes, knowing that the only way we often enter into a new change is when we feel like we don't have a choice, because we can't take it anymore over here. Well, coming to grips with this stuff is really healthy. Jacob decided to make that choice, and he moved his household. And I want to think like, one little U-Haul trailer tied to a donkey, and that's what we're looking at. Now, this guy was loaded, and he's got an entourage now, and he has tons of livestock. He's got servants, he's got kids, and they make their way back home. But there's no way he's going to be sneaky about this. He knows that he's going to be seen miles away by scouts from his brother. And that's exactly what happened. But Jacob was smart. And so, as you would do back in those days, he lined up his whole household, all of his goods, all of his possessions, starting from the least to the greatest, and paraded them toward Esau, as if to say to Esau, if you'll welcome me back, all of this is yours. That's how he did it. That's what he was doing. And the night before he knew he was going to face Esau, he crossed the river, sent everybody else on ahead of him, and he crossed the river to sleep the night alone. And there, he wrestled all night. The Bible says with an angel. Maybe. I guess. I'm not sure what that exactly looked like. We're not sure the color of the angel's eyes. But he wrestled all night long. And I wonder if the thing he was wrestling with is, who am I really? And who am I going to be? Because the potential pain across that river had to be massive. And Jacob, being a smart guy, he probably thought to himself, I could probably bail right now. I could start all over again. I've done this before. I know what to do. I'll be fine. And I wonder if there was a part of him that was ready to walk away from everything again. But he wasn't going to be that person. And so he did the hard work, the struggle, to work through the pain that he faced, knowing that it could be his death tomorrow, but he would die with honor and integrity. Dawn breaks. The angel says, all right, game over. You made it through the night. Jacob's like, you're not getting out of here unless you bless me. I know this wasn't all in vain. And Jacob says, okay, I'll bless you. Lays hands on him, pops his hip out of place. So he had a hip issue the rest of his life. A limp to remind him of his journey. A limp I think he was kind of grateful for. To always remind him of the struggle he chose to pursue. And then the angel changes his name. Says, you've been called Jacob. I'm giving you a new name. Your name is Israel. That's the first time this shows up in the story. Israel, which means struggles with God. Sometimes the struggle with God is we're going at odds with God. God is trying to say, look, I only want the best for you. And we're saying, forget you, God. I know the best way to go. And we struggle that way against God. But sometimes the struggle is different. Sometimes it's a struggle that maybe showed up that night at the campsite on the other side of the river, where Jacob is struggling with God, that God is actually alongside of him, working this stuff out, fighting the inner demons, getting rid of the fear that he might become who he was meant to be. He finally meets Esau with a new name and with deep humility, and discovers Esau had no interest in killing him, but welcomed his brother back. There was grace on both sides. Think for a moment, by the way, how powerful this story was over the generations for our heritage in Judaism. Talking about it around the campfire, the importance of forgiveness and grace and moving forward in our lives. So powerful. Richard Rohr comes up again with just an amazing quote. He says, "Only mutual apology, healing, and forgiveness offer a sustainable future for humanity. Otherwise, we are controlled by the past, individually and corporately. We all need to apologize." Can we just say those words out together? We all need to apologize. Some of you suck at this. I mean, really. That's the last thing you're going to do is say you're sorry, because somehow it makes you feel less than. It doesn't. It makes you a person of great strength to own your stuff. We all need to apologize, and we all need to forgive, or this human project will surely self-destruct. No wonder that almost 2/3 of Jesus' teaching is directly or indirectly about forgiveness. Otherwise, history devolves into taking sides, bitterness, holding grudges, and the violence that inevitably follows. As others have said, this is so good. Forgiveness is to let go of our hope for a different past. Let that sink in. Forgiveness is to let go of our hope for a different past. Reality is what it is, and such acceptance leads to great freedom as long as there is also both accountability and healing forgiveness. One of the most powerful books that Richard Rohr wrote is called Everything Belongs. And it communicates that your story, even the ugliest part, are a part of your story. It's not like God intended the horrible things for you in your life, but it's just that those things happen. They are there. And sometimes when we deny those things and just push them under the rug, and like that one guy I mentioned earlier, just pretend like, well, that's all in the past, it's not going to do anything, we actually rob ourselves of a huge piece of our life, a mine full of gems that will help us shine if we have the courage to face it. And I'm not sure, but I think that the emotional changes that we got to do in terms of reorienting our paradigms, I think those are harder changes than moving across country, changing jobs, etc. It's the inner work that is the hardest. And I think we're usually cowards. Well, back to Bananagate. 10 years after the last 10 years. Now I'm a father. And we just gotten back from a trip. And my little son Noah was toddling around, being I don't know what he was, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, something like that. And he probably was just being a kid, but I was tired, and I was hungry, and I snapped at him. I don't even know what I said, but I know my tone was not good. And as soon as I did that, I was taken back to Ottawa, Kansas, when I was 10 years old, and my dad said, "Do you really think you need to be eating that?" And I remembered that at that moment as a 10-year-old kid, I thought my dad was God. I thought my dad was shaming my body in somehow. Like, what do you mean? I knew I was husky, but I didn't think I was that bad. All these different things that were going on in me, and I immediately recognized that I was doing the same thing to my son. I also realized at that moment, new light bulb for me that I could not have seen prior to this. As I looked back at that exchange with my father with different eyes, I recognized that my father, in that outburst, defined the word hangry. You know that word? It's when you're hungry and you're angry. You are hangry. My dad was hangry. If you've ever met my dad, you know he's a pretty nice guy. And I can truly say this, that throughout my whole life, he never intentionally wanted to do anything but bless me and be a great guy, because that's who he is. I had to go through the apotheosis, debasement thing, because we all have to do that, to recognize the divinity and the dust together. But I recognize with new eyes and new freshness that I also was struggling with divinity and dust. And because I'd been there, I immediately apologized to my son. He doesn't remember this at all. I remember a couple other times when I was hangry and said words, had a tone that I didn't appreciate. And you know, because of that 10-year-old experience, usually within moments, at least not more than an hour, if I come to grips with it, I would go back and I would say, mostly to my son, because who can get mad at my daughter lately, really? But mostly to my son, I would go back and say, hey man, I'm sorry. That is not what I meant to say. That's not the tone I meant to carry. Forgive me. Because I knew that I needed to. Something within me, because of that whole process related to Bananagate. By the way, I mean, come on, I had an easy childhood comparatively to some of what you went through. Bananagate is more than the banana incident, okay? It represents all those things that we go through in our growing up years. And it's all relative to you. Your pain is horrific, my pain is horrific, because that's the human project. But there comes a time where you have to decide whether or not you want to address those things. And that leads us to another story. Jesus is in Jerusalem for one of the festivals. He comes up to this, they call it the Pool of Bethsaida. And the Pool of Bethsaida was famous in Jerusalem because at times the presence of God would show up where the pool would be otherwise still. All of a sudden it would get activity on it. And I don't know how they figured this out, but somebody figured out that when the pool was stirred inexplicably, people could touch the water, be in the water, and be healed. Amazing. So we catch up with Jesus. Afterward, Jesus returned to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish holy days. Inside the city, near the sheep gate, was the Pool of Bethesda. Oops, I said Bethsaida. Anyway, with 5 covered porches. Crowds of sick people, blind, lame, or paralyzed, lay on the porches. One of them had been lying there, had been sick for 38 years. When Jesus saw him and knew he had been ill for a long time, he asked him, "Would you like to get well?" And we look at this and we think, well, that's a really stupid question, Jesus. We didn't think there were any stupid questions, but now we know there might be at least one. Because why, if you're a healer, why, if you were a person and you're talking to somebody who is paralyzed, and they're right next to the pool where miracles are supposed to happen, why in the world would you say that's such an insensitive thing to say, isn't it? Come on, Jesus. Do you want to get well? What kind of dumb question is that? Well, actually, it's brilliant. Because this guy's been there for 38 years. And Jesus is thinking to himself, 38 years. 38 years. At year 20, couldn't you make a deal with somebody? Like, hey, scoop me next right to the water. I'll make you a deal. You get me in there as soon as that water starts stirring. Even though I'll be well, I'll do the same thing for you. I promise. We'll do it in writing, whatever it takes. Don't you think that would have happened? Jesus isn't asking a stupid question. He's asking a deeply personal, penetrating question. Do you want to get well? It's the same question for you. Do you want to get well? And the way we begin in that wellness journey is to be honest, to see that everything belongs and not think any other thing about it. Realize our story is our story, and there are parts of it that we have not wanted to look at or deal with because it's painful. Sometimes it's about people who've harmed us. Sometimes it's about how we've hurt ourselves. A couple weeks ago, I drove down to Fresno to lead a group of pastors and some discussion on some stuff. And on the way down, my son got me this book, an audio book. It might be hard to imagine I was able to focus on an audiobook because the drive from our neck of the woods to Fresno is so filled with beauty. Really, you can't concentrate on anything else, right? Oh my goodness, what a drive. But anyway, on the way down and back, I chewed up this entire book. And it was a good book with a title that unfortunately I'm never going to be able to use here for a teaching series, because the title of this book, it's a bestseller for the past few years, is The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fick. I'm guessing it's fick. It has F and then an asterisk and CK. I don't know any other word that it could possibly be, but that is the title of the book. And so at first I thought, when I first saw the title, I was like, that's a bestseller? Yeah. The guy's loaded now. It's actually a pretty good book. It's actually a pretty good book. And as I was listening to this book, some of the things that the author was saying reminded me at my tender age of 48 years old that I still have work to do. Some stuff that he was saying triggered stuff in me about lingering daddy issues that no longer require any interaction with my dad, who I get along with great, by the way. This is my stuff. This is my stuff to overcome, my stuff to deal with. And God is struggling with me. He's struggling with me when I want to avoid it, want to deny, and God is saying, come on, man. Come on, let's deal with this. Struggling with me, coming alongside and saying, I'm going to help you through this. I'm going to get you through this. That's what grace is all about. I love you as you are, but man, can you see what healed up more Pete looks like? Can you understand the freedom of that? And that's where beauty resides, but it all gets back to this question. Do you want to get well? Do you want to get well? What is your answer to that question? That's the question of your life. The Spirit of God is here. The Spirit of God heals, helps us in our process, gives us strength to move forward. Do you want to be well? Let's pray together. So God, just help us recognize in our consciousness what needs to become well in us now. For some of us, it is the stress of a physical change in our life, a moving thing, a relationship thing, whatever. And we haven't wanted to deal with. And that toxic environment that we're in, you are saying to us, well, how long do you think you're going to be able to live in that kind of toxic environment? Do you want to be well? Or maybe there are things in the environment that we can do to affect change, but we don't want to because we're afraid, and you're saying, but do you want to be well? And for most of us, if not all of us, we've got stuff under the surface of our lives that has been having its way with us to varying degrees. And we're tired. But we're afraid of what the paradigm change might be. We're afraid of what addressing these things might look like. And so we stay just as we are, untouched. And you whisper again into our ears, do you want to get well? So I pray that your Spirit blow like a refreshing breeze in this space, inviting us, wooing us to say yes. The man at the pool said yes and was healed. New life, new challenges, new future, but well. Help us. Help us come to the answer, and help us come work it out. In Jesus' name, amen.